everyone. I hope everyone had a great week last week. I hope that you were able to learn a lot about behavior and beginning to look at what the function of the behavior is and look at how can I provide support to students who maybe have special needs and they have certain types of behaviors that go along with their disability. So you had 2 weeks to do behavior because it's a lot. And as a inclusion teacher, which most of you will be, you will have students with exceptionalities in your room. And some of the things that accompany that is behavior issues. And remember, this is not only looking at those learners who may have special needs or exceptionalities, this is for all students and all learners. So it's really going to serve you well to really understand how you collect data. What's the process? What do we look at? Does the child already have an IEP? What's their disability? What category do they fall under? All these things are going to help you when you're gathering data so you can intervene and put together a plan that will help you. So let's move into week 8. I'm not going to recap too much on 7 because we are kind of continuing our learning. So we are going to look at classroom management. We're going to look at behavior intervention plans and how do we actually collect data to complete functional behavior assessments. Now there is going to be an assignment that you have to do that's called frequency and data collection, and this is really going to help you understand the beginning process. So when you're walking through this, and I'll show you in a little bit, the first few times that teachers do this, it's a little bit new to them. They have to practice, they have to gain the expertise. So it's not something that is going to come so easy for everyone. But with practice and collecting your data and the support of the special ed teacher and your team, you can actually learn to collect the right kinds of data depending on what the situation is, and you will become an expert. And this is going to really help you in your classroom with not only classroom management, but how do we support those students who have certain behaviors that we want to replace? How do we use that preventative strategy? And how do we get the consequences? And what does that intervention plan look like? And so each child will be different depending on what's going on. And you will soon find out when you get in your own classroom that every group that you get that comes through your classroom is always going to be different. You will not have the same set of students. They will have different needs. What worked maybe the year before will not work this school year. And you'll come to find out that this is of the norm in a classroom because everyone's unique and you have a unique group and everyone comes from different backgrounds, and when you mesh that all together, it makes a unique class. And so it will never usually repeat itself. And there may be groups that you get in your classroom that you don't really have a lot of those behaviors and you don't see that. But then there are some years that you'll have a lot and it can be overwhelming. Or you'll have more than one student who has maybe social emotional disorder and some things that accompany with their disability that makes it hard to manage your classroom in a way that functions with less stress. So that's why it's important for you to know how to do these intervention plans, to know about behavior, and how do you support them in a way that replaces those behaviors, and so it can be copacetic in your classroom and it can be warm and inviting and everyone feels that their optimal learning is happening and it's not stressful for everyone. So these are things that we got to look at as a teacher, right? So let's go ahead and get started. As I said, we're going to look at classroom management, behavior intervention plans. You're going to actually get to practice collecting data. You're going to read about the different types of data collection and how it will help you. You're going to have an IRIS. You did an IRIS module last week that really helped you, hopefully, to understand what functional behavior is. And I also have a really neat PowerPoint that helps you as well. When you are creating or collecting data for your assignment, I have an example for you to look at, which I find helpful. I like like examples. I'm a visual and kinesthetic learner, so I learn by looking and watching and then doing it and trying it myself. And maybe some of you are that way. Maybe some of you can read about it and you understand it. But I feel like to really dive deeper into this process, you actually have to do it, right? You need to see it done, you need to look at it, you need to read about it, you need to try it. So that's why I wanted to use you for homework. Remember, this is just the beginning depths of learning. You will learn what works, what doesn't. You'll have hopefully a great team that you can lean on to support you when you have maybe questions. So this is just the beginning for you, but it's important even in an introductory class for you to get to see many examples and see different ways and learn how to figure out what the function of the behavior is. What is that student communicating to you, right? That's usually a big indicator that something's going on. And when you figure out what that function of behavior is, then you can put a plan in place for that student. Okay, so here's our weekly objectives, and you'll see a lot of this is connected from last week, right? Because this class, you'll notice it's not really linear. I mean, we do check things off as we go through because it is an introductory course, but you'll see things that we'll talk about more than once, or you'll see it again in your chapters mentioned again more than once. And that's because it's very fluid, because all these things are connected. And hopefully when you're in your service learning schools, you're in your schools doing your service learning, you're making connections with what we're talking about, or maybe things you're seeing, and you're able to talk to that special ed teacher to dive even deeper into the stuff that we're just scratching the surface of. So our objective, we really want to be able to look at what does a school-wide support plan look like, and how do we properly develop classroom rules that work with that. How do we write a hypothesis of function based on our assessment that we gather? And then how would I provide a preventative strategy, a replacement strategy, a new skill to be learned, and then what would that consequence look like in that behavior intervention plan? So you will have, of course, a website I provide you with. You will have to read for a part of your homework assignment about measuring behavior. There is a chance for a RAD, and I just wanted to kind of touch on this for a moment. Remember, every student in my class has to do 4 reading assignment discussions. So the first week, the second week, week 2, everyone had to do the same article. I'm still grading a lot of those. I've noticed some people haven't been doing those as much as they should. Just remember, you are able to choose which article you feel is good for you, but keep in mind that we're already in week 8, and if you've only done 1, you still have 3 RADs left. So your choices are going to be limited, and that means you need to start doing some. I think this week would be a great week because it's going to dive deeper into conducting functional behavior assessments, which is one of your jobs as a teacher. You'll see, not every year, but when you have situations that arise for it, you need to learn how to do it. So I feel like that'd be a great article for a lot of people. So that is the link there for you. I do have an IRS video behavior, and that's just to show you that you'll be doing that as part of your homework, right? And then the data sheet that goes with it. So how are you going to be, what kind of assignments are you going to have? We just talked about it. You're going to watch the video, you're going to read about the IRS functional behavior assessment. There's a note sheet for you to practice inside of it, and then there is an optional RAD. But how I'm going to assess you, I'm going to assess you on that data sheet with that example that I'm going to show you. So that will be how you're assessed this week. Here's some keywords and concepts. Again, looking at behavior intervention plans, antecedent, which we learned about last week from the ABC, which was the antecedent behavior consequence, right? So the ABC analysis we learned about last week. So again, we see that antecedent word and term. We have event recording, interval recording, duration recording, and latency. And all of these are types of data you're going to collect. And each one you use serves a different purpose. Even though they're all collecting data, to put that intervention plan in place, you still have those different types that you can use. So moving on, the first thing that you're going to have to look at, I provided you with reading from your textbook. You're going to read chapter 8 from Exceptional Learners. If I'm not mistaken, I think that you were supposed to look at the Exceptional Learners textbook last week, but if you didn't, I put it on there again because I want you to refer back to that. So make sure that you're reading that. The other thing that you're going to do is I provided you with a website, okay, which is called Behavior Intervention Plan. So I've used that term quite a bit, right? So we need to learn what a behavior intervention plan is and understand it. Okay, so when we're trying to decrease those inappropriate behaviors that result in your class, we have to make sure that we're figuring out what the student is doing. We have to make some modifications to the behavior. So this behavior intervention plan really can help general ed students, so all your students, and even those with special needs. So keep this in mind. You may have something going on with a student that does not receive services for special ed and they're just in your inclusive classroom. This is also going to help serve those students as well. So what is this functional behavior assessment? Well, it's really a formal process, a way for you as teachers or professionals and parents to come together and be more, successful and specific in how to solve a problem, right? It's determining what the function of the student's behavior. So what are they trying to communicate with you, right? What are they trying to get? And this is prior to this function of behavior and this process that you do, your ABC analysis, your functional behavior assessment. All of that is done before you put this plan in place, this behavior intervention plan. And it can be written for any of the disability category areas, so just keep that in mind. The way that we look at this, if it's impacting learning and there's an issue and it's what we call chronic that continues to happen and it becomes concerning, that's when you would do these sorts of things. Not for something that just happens out of the blue once or twice. This is something that's ongoing that you're looking at. So really, it's a formal way for you to document also the things that you try, what's not happening, that you hope would, and then you're describing, of course, what the behavior is, the reasons, and maybe the interventions that would address that certain behavior. And then it also addresses the behavior like that's disrupting not only that child and their learning, but everyone around them, their peers. Okay, so it talks more about a team approach. And just like when you have an IEP team, most of the time the same IEP team would be helpful to help you gather information, especially if you see a behavior accompanying someone that is receiving special ed services, right? So it's not surprising that you would involve all those team members. Okay, so here's some examples of team members that can help you, and that would be part of that behavior intervention plan, that team. So it would be the case manager, maybe of the student, parents or caregivers, of course the student themselves, school professionals, which this would be any kind of school psychologist or counselor or administrators, any gen ed teacher, and then any other related service provider that maybe that student knows really well. Okay, there is a really neat video here I want you to watch. Please make sure it's down here. Please make sure you watch it. It explains a little bit more about behavior intervention plan. Here's some characteristics, some steps that really help you go into that preventative strategies and modifications that we talk. So this is helping the child learn new behaviors, right, new skills. Whenever we're doing this behavior intervention plan, it should address or have these following things. It should be targeted behavior, so name and describe the behavior that should be addressed. You should use that data, the frequency, the duration, the intensity, all of that has to be included. You have to look at the behavior that has to be taught to replace the behavior that you don't like, right? And who's going to be teaching that skill to the child? Who is involved is going to depend on where the behavior is happening, right? So if it's in the classroom, obviously it's the gen ed teacher. If it's happening in the lunchroom, then it's going to be people who work with the lunchroom. So this is important because depending on where the behavior is occurring, those people need to be teaching the skill. What's your plan for reinforcing to continually make sure the student knows what they need to be doing. And then what happens if the child doesn't do what you want them to do? They have to have a consequence. And then how are you going to monitor the progress made, right? How are you going to assess to see if it's working? How will you know if it's working? And what kind of data are you going to collect to show those changes, whether it's improving or not improving? Okay, here are some steps when you're writing behavior intervention plans. Of course, the first step is your data collection and your systems you have, right? We got to analyze the data. We got to look at the behavior around those office referrals. We have to look at the data and collecting it in multiple settings, right? This could be in the bus, this could be in passing periods, lunch, etc. And we have to look at the environment, right? Does the environment contribute to this kind of behavior? Okay, think about, what's the student trying to communicate? Are they trying to gain something from this, or are they trying to avoid, right? So is it work avoidance? Are they trying to gain power in the classroom? Are they trying to gain attention? So these are things you have to think about. We also have to look at the goals and the different forms that you will use in this behavior intervention plan. What influences the student behavior, right? So this goes back to focusing on those behaviors you're looking at. You should only, when you're doing this, always just focus on 2 or 3 behaviors for the student to improve on. If there's a lot of behaviors that's going on, say the student has social emotional behavior disorder, or maybe that student already has an IEP and they have a disability and the behavior is also connected with that. You can't write a behavior intervention plan for 10 behaviors, right? You start small. You need to only focus on 2 or 3. It's too overwhelming for the student, and it's too much data collecting and time spent for you and drains you, because you cannot do that. So we say focus on 2 to 3, especially if there's multiple. So when you're trying to focus on and make meaningful change, it's important for you to consider these questions, right? So who is involved in the behavior? Is it preventing it or making it worse? So this is a good question. How does the behavior appear? When does it happen? Why is it happening? That's questioning that trigger. That's why the ABC analysis is a really good place to start, right? What happens with the behavior? Where does it occur? This is what we talked about earlier. What place is this happening? When does the behavior occur? When does it not occur? So when does it not happen? What areas is the student doing well and no behavior is happening? And how long does it last? So all these things are very important. There's also some tips on the bottom that talks about the steps of writing an actual intervention plan. And like I said, please make sure that you watch this video because it's really important. Okay, so here's the RAD. I said that article to go with the RAD, the reading assignment discussion. It says what beginning special educators need to know about conducting functional behavior assessments. And just remember, when we say special educators, we're talking about all educators, because where we live in a world now where it's inclusive classrooms and a lot of students who have exceptionalities or special needs are placed with their peers, these are things that you have to consider, right? So you're a part of this team, and you are a special educator, even if your licensure is not special education considering that's not your special area. You still will be working with special needs students. So that's why it's important for you to know how to do them. Okay, so I do have a presentation here for you. It is about functional behavior assessment. It's really important. For the sake of time, I'm not going to really go through a lot of this. This defines what it is. And if you are a visual person, this may help you understand, and this may actually look familiar. You're thinking, this kind of looks like RTI, what we learned about. You are kind of correct, because the behavior supports, or the systems that we put in place, we have something called a PBIS, right? This is like a school policy behavior intervention system, right? So what this shows us, this picture, this visual, it's showing us that it's a framework just like RTI, but this one's specifically for behavior. So what these 3 areas indicate is what students are receiving in terms of intervention, right? So just like RTI, you have your core. where everyone in the whole school has the same rules, right? And like be responsible, be ready, be safe. You'll see that often in schools. That's considered a school-wide policy behavior or policy behavior intervention support or public, whatever you want to call it. So what this does is this system is to try to reach students before you have to intervene, meaning it's to make sure you cut off some of those bad behaviors ahead of time by having a system in place of procedures and things the students need to do. Now, even though this is the whole school thing that usually happens, you have to also think about you, even though you have those rules that's set by the school most of the time or by your grade level, you'll have individual classroom rules and procedures of how you want your class to run. These are things that are included under the umbrella of all students, of CORE. So all students, no matter if they have a disability or IEP or whatever it is, they need to understand that they have to follow rules as well, right? And it has to be taught to them in a way that they understand, wherever their developmental level is. So these are things to think about. But when we talk about 80 to 90%, everyone in the classroom receives this, okay? So the reason we go up to 90% is you have to think about those students who have exceptionalities. Maybe you're not developmentally ready to get it, right? But most of the time you teach it to them in a way they can understand. But we find with our data that 80 to 90% of students are going to be getting all core instruction, which means that that's not leaving a big percentage for those behavior issues. But there are some students who need intervention with behavior, just like we need intervention with RTI. So we find it's about 5 to 10% students are going to get the targeted, these are targeted students. So these are what we call at risk, just like we do with RTI. So we have to look at small classroom group interventions, right? And we're monitoring their progress, okay? So this is where you're going to try different things one at a time with the student, research-based, to see how this is going. Then you have 1 to 5% that need intensive intervention. So these are more targeted students. We're past the point of at risk. This is something chronic that's not going away. So this could be individual at this point. If we say small group, it's normally no more than 3, just like we say with RTI. The interventions at this point really have to increase in intensity, and you're going to monitor them weekly, and you're going to collect data. And what this does, just like RTI is a framework where you use to cut off to catch students so we don't have to refer them to special ed. Well, just like this, we're going to use this framework so we can cut off having to do these functional behavior assessments so that way we can do intervention plans with them. So we want to make sure that we try all of this first before we just start referring them to get a behavior intervention plan and start that process. Okay, so that's what that looks like. And it talks about the FBA in schools, an easy way for you to really remember what FBA process is you just remember the acronym DASH, right? So first you define the behavior. You ask about the behavior, right? Where it occurs, when is it, why is it happening? You summarize it. Then you see the behavior, which by you gathering your data and your observations, and then you hypothesize, right? So you write a hypothesis of what the function is, like where, when, and why the behavior occurs. So, and then that accompanies the function of the behavior. And it talks about the different kinds of students, and again, you'll look here, that word I talked about earlier, chronic misbehavior, right? Maybe they've had 3 to 5 discipline referrals for major behaviors. Maybe they're absent a lot. Maybe they don't understand the behavior because it's due to their disability or exceptionality. And other interventions have not been successful. Going back to that framework here, you try to intervene and things are not working, right? It's important for you, whenever you are defining behaviors in that first process of functional behavior assessment, you have to be very specific in how you're defining it. So this here is really vague. Julia is aggressive. Well, okay. Well, how is she aggressive? You know, you're going to have to be more specific. Well, she hits other students during PE class when she does not get her way. And this is something Julie does a lot, okay? So do you see the difference in the descriptive versus the vague? And a lot of teachers will use these terms when we're defining behavior. But we have to remember, when you're defining behavior, it has to be measurable and seen by all. It has to be specific enough where everyone understands what you're talking about. Because what I think is disruptive may not be what you think is disruptive, right? So how is Michael disruptive? Well, he blurts out and makes inappropriate comments during classroom discussions, and he does this all the time, right? So that's a way that you need to remember to define them, okay? I'm not going to go through all of this, but I did want to show you something. This is talking about frequency recording, which is kind of what we're going to be going over, okay? So here's an example of the behavior, and we'll talk about this in just a minute. This is an example of frequency recording and how you do it. In the bottom is interval. So we're going to be doing both of these to practice today when you're watching a video. So this goes over that. All right, so the homework, let's get to that. So here's all your resources. Make sure you go through the PowerPoint presentation first and make sure you read the behavior intervention plan. Now at the bottom under assignments, you'll see there's the reading assignment discussion if you want to do a RAD. There's a Nearpod quiz on function behavior, just so you can have automatic feedback to see how you're doing. And remember guys, the Nearpod has been giving me a lot of trouble. If you find that the links are not working, please let me know so I can go in and fix it, okay? But I want you to have those quizzes because I want, where we don't have a lot of quizzes in the week and we just have tests after each module or unit, I want you to be able to have that feedback so you can practice and have an understanding of what we're doing. Now the IRIS case study assessment is your homework. So this is what I was saying that you will be doing to have practice with collecting data for the functional behavior assessment. So when you click on it, it will show you exactly the order you need to complete the assignment. There's several parts to it. The first part is going to be reading the case study unit. Now what this does is this is going to walk through how do you measure behavior. So if you look at the table of contents, it's going to talk to you what an overview of the different types of data, and then you'll see here we have frequency event recording, interval recording, duration recording, and latency recording. And remember, the two you're going to be practicing for your homework is the frequency and the interval. Now, what I think is really cool is we have some case study examples. If you're like me, you want to see an example of what you're talking about, right? I need to see some form of what this looks like. So these are really great examples for the different types of data and what was going on and why they used the certain recording data that they used. So make sure that you look at the case studies and make sure you really pay attention to frequency event. I would even save this, guys, because this is going to allow you to go back. This is going to be a resource for you, and you could even go back and look at it when you're working on your homework. So once you read that, you're going to next watch the video. So here's the video of a little girl. And what you're going to do is you're going to watch the video, right? So we're going to watch her, and then we're going to complete the practice data sheet. So you'll have to download it, and you're going to type in it, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. Here's the sheet. So I said you're going to be doing the frequency data and the interval. So what to note with the frequency data is that we're going to be looking at how many times did this occur, frequency, in a given time. Frequency data is probably the easiest to get data from because it's not hard to really understand. What you do is you put the time that you're starting, the time that you ended, so this is the amount of time that you watched them, so you might use your stopwatch. And then during that time, you're going to tally each time that behavior occurred. How long did you watch them, right? So here, if you started at 10:30, and you only went to 10:32 and 30 seconds, that means that you were only watching them for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And then you're going to divide how many times this happens into how long you watched them, your length of observation, and that's going to give you your rate. So that's the frequency. The interval is where we're going to look at during a certain amount of time, how often did the behavior occur, right? So when we talk about target behavior, that's the one that we don't want, right? So the reason we call it target behavior, a lot of people get this confused. They think target behavior means behavior we want the student to do. No, the target behavior is the behavior we're looking at, right? We're trying to figure out what's going on. So whenever the behavior, or the target behavior you don't want happening happens, right, you're going to put a plus. If it doesn't happen, you're going to do a minus. Something to think about when you're looking at interval recording is to only do it for a few seconds, right? And you'll notice on the video, there's a beep, okay? 20-second beep. So you only look at 20 seconds at a time, most of the time. That's why it has quotations. You do not need to write 20 seconds. You know that that's the beeps, right? So during that 20-second time, did that target behavior occur? Plus. Here's where you have to be specific. What did the student do? So in the video, watch what she did. Okay, in the next 20 seconds, did it occur? If it didn't, put a minus. If nothing happened, then you don't put behavior. If something happened, you put a plus and you write what it was. And you're going to do it all the way down 8 times, right? When we get done, you're going to have to add up. You see where it says total intervals during which target behavior occurred? So total intervals were coded. That's this column, coded. Count up how many pluses only, not minus. And you're going to write that number there. And then the percentage of intervals during which the target occurred. This is where you're going to have to do a little calculations, right? You're going to have to divide how many times it happened to how much time that you actually were doing it, like watching them. And now I'll show you an example to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so here's the video. When you watch it, you'll notice in the video, and you may have to watch it several times, the video is only 5 minutes, 20 seconds long, right? But when you are listening to her and watching her, you will see that her behavior, right, is current. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I want you to watch it. You have to evaluate her behavior. So every time it beeps, that's 20 seconds. So remember, on the sheet, it's 8 times this happens. You're going to write if the behavior occurred and plus it. So you'll be noticing a beep inside, okay? So when you're doing this, I also want you to think about these questions. What was the frequency of the behavior? Well, we're going to get that, right? We're going to get that from this. We're going to get it from here. We'll know the frequency. That's the rate. You'll already have that. You're going to see, based on the frequency recording data, what was the rate? We already getting that. What percentage of intervals did the student exhibit from the behavior? Once you do this bottom section, you'll have your interval percentage, right? And compare the results of the two, right? So this is what we call a partial interval. Partial is where we're only looking at certain snips of time instead of a whole long period of time. If it was a whole interval, you wouldn't do 20-second intervals. You would just put your stop time. Okay, I'm going to watch the student for 15 minutes. And you would set your timer on your phone for 15 minutes. And then you would make and do whole interval recording. This is partial, okay, because we did 20-second intervals. Since we're only doing partial interval, that's why it says that. Based on the data, do you think the student's behavior is problematic? Well, that's going to depend on what her rate is. If this is happening, say, 50% of the time, then yeah, obviously it's a problem. If it happens less than that, maybe it's not. It just depends. So after you do that and you complete your sheet, you're going to submit this document to Dropbox, right? Some people have a very difficult time with the bottom section. It's very confusing. They do real well at the top. The interval they quite don't get. They don't understand why we have 20 seconds here. They don't understand how to do the calculations, so it's confusing to them. That's why I said go back to the PowerPoint, right? Go back to what we looked at up here in the case study. Use that. Go here where it talks specifically about data and frequency and intervals. So you'll see here is an example, right? It tells you the date, you will do the time started, the time ended. Now you'll look here, they did 15-minute time. Total time was 15 minutes. They tallied up how many times that target behavior occurred in 15 minutes, right? 18 times. Obviously, that's an issue. I already know that before I even answered that question at the bottom. And guys, when you answer the questions at the bottom, it should be questions you're always asking. And then how you get your calculation is you have to divide the total number of occurrences by the length of the observation, which was 15 minutes. So every 1.2 minutes, this behavior is occurring. I would say that's a problem, right? So that gives you an example. That's why I tell you to read this first. Then, to do the interval, you'll notice it tells you whole interval recording, right? It yields data for the whole duration of the behavior. Or it's partial, where it gives you partial periods, right, that observer indicates. So a student worked on an assignment for 15 seconds of a 30-second interval. So for half the time they were working, the other half they weren't. So that's why we do interval recording. And if you scroll down, it kind of talks to you more about the behavior. It gives you more in-depth of the two behaviors, right? And then it starts talking about different data collection. And then here is a very more detailed example of coding the interval behavior, okay? So this is a more in-depth, and that's why it's confusing. I always give students more than one chance to do this behavior form, especially the bottom section. So if I email you, say, hey, let's go back and look at this again, that's okay, all right? I want you to actually understand it. So if you have to do it more than one time, that's okay. Just keep that in mind. I did provide you with an example, right? I didn't give you the rate here, but I let you see, okay, to calculate that. Remember what you do. How many times 6 divided by 5, because that was the length of observation. So 6 divided by 5 would be your rate. Down here, I want you to see how I coded it. We're looking at partial intervals every 20 seconds. Remember, on this you don't have to write 20 seconds. That's why I put quotations. So, interval recording. The behavior occurred. What was the student doing? The student is complaining about the repetition of the work assignments. Okay. The second 20 seconds, they didn't do it. The third, they did. The student's complaining about the repetition of the work assignments. Okay. And then you'll see down here the total intervals which recorded the target behavior, 6. So add up how many codes you have that are plus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Intervals recorded, 16. Percentage of intervals during which target behavior is 37.5. Okay. This is an example of one of the ways that you could do it. It's up to you. Remember, when you're doing the target behavior, you have to do it the time that is there that you allowed. That's important when you're doing this. So let's go back for 1 minute and look at what they did up here. Okay. So you'll look here that they observed the student for 10 minutes. She says the target behavior. She explains specifically what this student's doing. Engages in off-task behavior. Daydreaming, walks around the classroom, doing independent seed work. So for 10 minutes, right, they recorded. But they were only looking specifically at 10 seconds at a time, right? That's called partial interval. If it was whole interval, they looked at the whole 10 minutes. But all of these are 10 seconds. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, so on. And every time the behavior occurred, they would put a check mark or a plus. If it didn't occur, they put a 0 or a minus. I have you use a plus or minus, but you get the gist. So they did that for 10 minutes, right? 10 seconds at a time. So when they got done, they had to add up all their check marks, because that's every time the behavior occurred, they added it up, right? So how many check marks did they get? They got 30, right? So what you have to do here is do a little calculations. We know that they did it, right, 50% of the time. If they did it here, look here, 60, they looked at 60 intervals, and it happened, they counted 30 of them. We know that that's half of the time, right? So that's how we got 50%, because it's happening half the time. And even here, you'll look here, 10 minutes. So it's easier sometimes to just calculate it without having to do these two steps, but I just wanted you to get a gist of what we're doing. So look up here, it gives you a little bit, if you're doing partial interval recording, just remember that you have to calculate how many seconds it happens. All right, so that's what you'll do. You will turn this into Dropbox. All right, so remember you have to do however many times the behavior occurred, right? How many were coded, and then divide it, and that's going to give you your percentage. Okay, guys, so that follows through with week 8. If you have any questions or you're kind of confused, or maybe you find the Nearpod quiz link didn't work, please reach out and let me know, because on my end it shows it works, but for students sometimes it doesn't, so just let me know that. But I hope you have a great week. Remember, this is due on Sunday. And if you have questions, let me know. If you're unsure if you're doing it right, you can send it to me. Say, hey, can you look at this? I'm not sure. And then I can kind of help you and guide you a little bit. All right, guys. I will see you in the next video. Take care.